Hello, and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's episode, I'm talking to the highly talented Louise Hare. Louise Hare is a London-based writer and has an MA in creative writing from Birkbeck, University of London. Originally from Warrington, the capital is the inspiration for much of her work, including This Lovely City, which began life after a trip into the deep level shelter below Clapham Common. This Lovely City was featured on the inaugural BBC Two TV book club show Between the Covers and has received multiple accolades, securing Louise's place as an author to watch. Her most recent novel, Miss Aldridge Regrets, was published in 2022 and is available in paperback from January 2023. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Louise. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. It's January, so it's sort of like, this is my first work thing since last year. So I was like, what's happening?
Well, I hope you have a great year ahead. I hope 2023 is full of wonderful literary things for you in the way that the last few years have been for you. So you've had a really exciting few years. You had This Lovely City come out in 2020, which means that you were working on it during lockdown. And then you had Miss Aldridge Regrets come out last year, I believe you're working on its sequel as well now.
Yeah.
Very exciting. So to begin with, if you can just introduce your two novels, tell us a little bit about each of them.
Yeah, so they're quite different. But I actually started both of them when I was doing my masters at Birkbeck. So This Lovely City they both started as short stories. Basically, I'm rubbish at short stories because people read them and they're like, well, what happens next? And obviously with a short story, that's supposed to be it. You're not supposed to wonder what happens next. So This Lovely City was sort of inspired by, as you read out in my bio, I did this sort of geeky trip into, there's a deep level shelter next to Clapham South tube station. And I knew that it had been an air raid shelter in World War II, but it was only when I got down there and I saw these photographs that I realised that they'd actually used it to house Windrush passengers in 1948. And that was partly why Brixton became sort of a hub for the Black community at that time, because it was sort of the closest labour exchange to that venue. So when they sort of came out from the deep level shelter in the day, when they got kicked out, that was the nearest sort of labour exchange. So it sort of emerged out of this short story about this young man who's arrived in London and immediately regrets it and wants to go back to Jamaica. And I just sort of thought, we always have this vision in our minds, I guess sort of this golden, age sort of vision of that period and Windrush passengers and how happy they must have been to come to the UK, and we sort of see it as a good thing, but also we assume that those people thought it was a good thing, and actually most of them had a horrible time. So I was just thinking, actually, so many of those people that came over in the late 40s, early 50s must have got here and thought, I've made a terrible mistake. And so I just wanted to sort of look at that perspective, I guess. And then because I was reading The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvin at the same time, and I was sort of thinking, because obviously he's got a character who literally just desperately wants to go back to Trinidad and hates it here. And I was sort of trying to meld those ideas into sort of a murder mystery. So that was This Lovely City. And then with Miss Aldridge, it sort of came out of having to write a crime short story. And because there's jazz in both novels, or there's jazz in This Lovely City, and I was sort of writing a jazz club scene at the time for that book, I was actually being quite lazy, and I thought, I'll just write another jazz club scene for this story, but I'll imagine a totally different character, which is where Lena Aldridge sort of emerged from. And again, it was just sort of like, well, what happens to this person afterwards? And then I had to sort of start thinking about that. But that one is definitely more of a traditional murder mystery, whereas This Lovely City is more about community and about relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think This Lovely City, it does have a murder mystery in it, but although it's so strange, because although it's central to the plot, it doesn't feel central to the book. Like what is essential to the book are these lovely characters that we have, Laurie and we have his friends and the jazz club and his band, and we've got a love story in there, and we've got issues about race and all of that. And that community, that's what feels central to the book. And the murder mystery, although is the driving force of the plots, feels very subtle. So if I was to describe this lovely city, the first word that came to my mind wouldn't be a murder mystery. I'd call it maybe like something literary, or like maybe historical fiction. But Miss Aldridge Regrets is like very much a murder mystery, and from the first page, essentially, absolutely the first page, we know that it's a murder mystery because as readers are witness to a murder. What was that like for you? Because I mean, I don't know about you, but me, usually what I find with authors is their writing is quite similar across their books. Like the style and kind of what they write about tends to be, if someone writes historical fiction, they don't tend to then write a murder mystery or like a horror, for example. But your books in that way feel so different. So what was that like for you? Kind of how did it feel? How did it come about that they were so different?
Yeah, I think the main reason I found it really hard writing This Lovely City. I think there was a lot of things. There's a lot of scenes that were difficult to write, like horrible things happening to the characters at certain times. And I think I just wanted to sort of come out of that and write something fun. So the whole point of Miss Aldridge was, I want to talk about some issues, but at the end of the day, it's kind of fun to just murder these horrible people. And have this character who, Lena's a lot of fun. And I was writing this one in first person, whereas This Lovely City is in third person. It felt like I was going on an adventure with her and sort of experienced all these different things and wearing all these glamorous clothes that she sort of has borrowed for this trip that she's on. So I think even though it is very different, it sort of felt quite natural just because, I kind of just wanted to write something that was fun, that I didn't need to sort of worry as much about. There was a lot of things with This Lovely City that I struggled with because I've never written a male point of view before. So obviously half of it's in Laurie's point of view, and so there's a lot of sort of male relationships, like friendships and different things going on. And so I just wanted to go, right, I'm just going to write this one voice, this crazy woman who's losing the plot, and then all the crazy stuff is happening around her. So it was just quite fun. But I think there's some elements that I say, it's still got a little bit of a romance in there. And, I do talk about race in a different way. I guess being on a ship, it was kind of easy to sort of have those things in that I wanted to talk about, but then also have the sort of light side as well.
Yeah, because it does. I mean, it does still address like race and class and friendship and mother and daughter relationships and father and daughter relationships. Mother and daughter relationships we have in This Lovely City, which I also loved. I loved that difficult relationship that we saw in This Lovely City and how kind of like strained that was, and the secrets, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it. So when it comes to writing, and like generally, but also with these two books that you've written so far, what really inspires you?
Different things. I think I just got lots of different stories that they're mostly stories I wanted to read, essentially. I've always been a big reader, and so I love historical fiction, but I just got really annoyed at picking up books, especially those sort of big historical fiction debuts. They always come out every January. They've got beautiful cover, and everyone goes, "Oh my God, this book's amazing." And then they've always got one black character and they're a servant or a slave, and something bad happens to them. They die, or they get thrown in jail, or just terrible things happen to them. And I just thought, actually, I would like to write those stories, but from that person's perspective. And actually, maybe they're not a servant, maybe they are more middle class, or, I think the collective imagination of what our history is very different to the reality. There were middle class black people in Victorian England. So, why don't we explore their stories? Why don't we ever hear about their stories? So I think that's where I sort of started off with. And obviously the two books I've published so far are both sort of 20th century historical. But I do want in the future to sort of go back further and look at Georgian London from the perspective of people of colour, and sort of go into that, what it was actually like to live in London, not necessarily as a slave, but, you know, as somebody who wasn't that far, you know, removed from that reality, and see what, you know, life was, because we know that people were traded on the streets of London, and that there were, you know, so-called slaves, people not getting paid for work. So I'd like to explore that angle a little bit, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think the history of that we're told of Britain is extremely single-minded, or like single with a single vision, and we don't know enough about Black people and people of color, but it wasn't as if they just suddenly arrived in the 70s or the 60s. They've been part of the fabric of society, and I think it's really fantastic that books like yours and so many others and are shedding light on that, and that the research is out there. But I do think that a lot of it has been quite academic and quite hidden, so it's nice that so much of this is coming into sort of mainstream publishing, or a bit more accessible to the average person, which, yeah, I love. So, you know, so you did touch on the fact that you wanted to tell stories, and the stories that you want to read. I want to go a little bit deeper on that. So you mentioned the fact that, you know, most representation that you've seen in historical fiction before was kind of like, you know, you'd have like a side character that was Black but was going through so much trauma and suffering. And actually what you've done with your book is you've made them protagonists that experience a whole host of emotion, and that are, you know, having a great life in one way or another. Maybe not great, but a good life, right? Like they're doing stuff, and they're making a difference, and they're building community, and they've got friends and all of that kind of stuff. But what's been your experience generally of how kind of like the landscape is changing with regards to storytelling?
You mean in terms of like publishing?
Yeah.
I think it's getting better slowly. So the first novel I actually wrote, which is unpublished, was set in Victorian London, and it was about a sort of mixed race family living in Bloomsbury, quite middle class, and they were very heavily based on the family of Ira Aldridge, who was a Shakespearean actor from the 1830s sort of onwards, and he used to travel around Europe, you know, was given medals and, you know, lots of awards for his acting. And, you know, you can go to his old house in Crystal Palace, which I think now is like divided into like 5 flats or something, but there's like a blue plaque on the wall, so you can actually go and see where he used to live. And he owned that house. So I sort of based my sort of fictional family on his a little bit. But yeah, when I finished, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a perfect novel, obviously it's unpublished for a reason, which is the plot isn't strong enough. But a lot of the feedback I got from agents sending out my first 3 chapters, you know, the usual sort of standard package that you have to send out, there's not enough racism.
Oh, wow.
I was like, but that's I mean, I was like, no, there's a bit that comes in later, but also like the main point of the novel wasn't to showcase racism as a thing. But they were like, well, this is a Black family living at this time, they would have, you know, they wouldn't have been able to live like this. And I was like, well, I've done my research, actually, they could have. And racism is a thing that sort of evolves over time. When there weren't that many Black people, when there's not a big community, there's not that much animosity against the community that doesn't exist. So, you know, I'm not saying there wasn't racism in Victorian London. Of course there was, and there was some in the novel, but just not, they expected there to be this huge uprising against this family, and the fact that they were mixed race, sort of a Black man married to a white woman. And actually that was pretty common at that time, because there weren't that many Black people, so it wasn't always possible for 2 Black people to get together, because there weren't that, you know, that many in Victorian London at that time. And so it just was really annoying. It was really frustrating that, you know, there was no comments, the character, or, you know, what the plot, you know, you send out a synopsis of the full plot, and it's just like, we want more, you know, it's not believable because there's not enough racism as your main reason for rejecting a book, I think is a bit, you know, short-sighted. And so, but then you look now, I mean, that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago when I was sending that book out first. Now you're seeing more, Victorian fiction coming out from Black writers with Black protagonists. And again, there is some racism in there, but it's not, I would say it's no more than what was in my original book. So I think people are starting, okay, there was more diversity and things were a bit different than we just expected. And so, but I think part of the problem has been, especially in the UK, that there just haven't been books about that period written by Black authors, been published before. And so people's experience of reading stuff from the 19th century with Black protagonists has been American, which means slaves. And talking about slavery. And so they're expecting that kind of narrative, but you're never going to get that from a book set in the UK because it's just not the environment that people lived in.
Yeah, exactly. So what was your research process like?
So it was a bit different for each book. So This Lovely City, I actually read a lot of fiction to start off with. So I read The Lonely Londoners by Sam Sullivan. I read To Sew With Love by E.R. Braithwaite, his was about, I guess they're both sort of semi-autobiographical novels in that, so E.R. Braithwaite, I think he was like an engineer. He'd been in the RAF. He was like really highly qualified, but couldn't get a job with his qualifications when he came out the RAF because he was Black. So he ended up becoming a school teacher in this really rough school in East London. So it's about, his sort of experience there and trying to find somewhere to live that's close to the school. Everyone, not being able to rent a room and all these kind of things. So sort of learning from those experiences, which I wanted to sort of use, especially for Laurie in the book. And then reading lots of first person accounts of people that came over in the late 40s. I live in South London, so it's easy for me to go to Brixton, which is where the Black Cultural Archives are. So I managed to get some good information there. And then I guess also leading on my own experiences because, I don't know, things haven't changed that wildly since 1950 necessarily. So,
So when it comes to looking at the 1940s and 50s, and obviously like Miss Aldridge is actually set in the 1930s. So with your research, did you find anything that kind of really, either like really surprised you or like really shocked you, or also just like really inspired you or made you feel good?
I think, Soho features in both books, which I think is partly because I just kind of like that idea that there was a place where people could go and mix, and there were people from all different classes and all different races. There were gay, even in the 30s, there were gay clubs and clubs where Black and white people used to go and party together, and, sort of anything went and anyone was welcome to an extent, obviously, but, compared to other places. So I've kind of saw that as my sort of safe space that I could sort of send my characters to a little bit, especially with Miss Aldridge, actually, because there's quite a big sort of obviously flashback section that's sort of set in Soho. And I guess, it's quite nice being able to walk around a lot of the areas. And you can see a lot of, a lot of the buildings are still there. And you can kind of guess which bits got bombed because, there's usually hideous sort of 60s buildings in the way. But I think part of the reason I like writing about London is just because it's easy to sort of walk around and be inspired by different areas and different buildings. So, one of the things that come up in my research for This Lovely City was that the Lyceum Theatre, which is where the Lion King is, was, obviously it's been a theatre for hundreds of years, but it was used as like a dance hall in the 50s. So it was really cool to write a few chapters and set a few different scenes there with Laurie playing and Evie being in the sort of crowd dancing. And I kind of like that aspect of history that you can walk past the building and it's had all these different uses through time. So I kind of like playing with those ideas.
That's nice. That sounds good. Really kind of like a really immersive research process. And so, it sounds fun as well. And I think like you live in London as well. So I think it gives you a little bit more like anchorage and probably helps bring a novel to life as well as you're writing it. Because I've never written anything longer than a short story, but I can imagine writing a novel is can be grueling and isolating and like you can, a lot of it is just you sat in front of your laptop tapping away, bashing away at your keys. So it sounds like you've had a little bit more of an active maybe process, which is good. I really like the sound of that. And actually, so I mentioned in your bio, and you mentioned it already, you went to see that deep level shelter in near Clapham Common. And actually, like, I didn't know that it existed until I read it in your bio the other day. And and you said actually that obviously it was used in World War II, but then when people arrived on Empire Windrush, they opened it up and literally like just sent people there. I was really glad actually to read a novel about the Windrush generation, because I hadn't read anything, and I know that there is increasingly more literature about it, but still probably not enough. And it's recent history; it's the 70s, right? So it's recent history, and we've seen in recent years what was termed as the Windrush scandal, and you know all of this is kind of linked to the government's hostile environment and their really awful immigration policies that, let's be real, right, that deny people human rights and aren't keeping families together and are treating refugees as something less than human, essentially. So what was it like for you exploring that? Because I mean, just reading it, there were bits that I found really difficult. Like, you know, you can really get from Laurie that he's doubting his decision, especially, you know, I don't want to give away too much in that plot, but when things kind of when there's a lot of attention on him and he kind of loses his job, or he loses he's not able to perform music in the way that he wants to do it. I felt his sadness and his kind of fear as well about the future. And it really kind of brought to life how difficult that whole time must have been for people. And then to know that even to date, people are still suffering and struggling because they were never given the formal recognition that they deserved at the time. They were never supported in the way that they should have been. And so now so many people are not given citizenship or security, whatever it is that they need. Yeah. So what was that like for you? You know, reading about that, finding out about things, how did you process all of that stuff?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I'd basically written the book before the Windrush scandal sort of hit the papers. So I think that happened in about, when was that happen? Like 2018, beginning of 2018 maybe?
Yeah.
So I'd sort of pretty much finished the novel. I'd gone through several edits with my agent. So we talked about it and we're like, actually, I don't think there's anything else we need to put in, because actually the book, I think it stands, you know, obviously on its own, but also I think it already discusses a lot of the issues that people that are relevant and that people would want to talk about, which is the fact that, you know, people came over on British passports. People came over legally, and the whole Windrush scandal is that the government are going back on, you know, these promises, and it is kind of disgusting, you know, to think that actually it's down to paperwork that they threw away. Well, sorry, if you dispose of paperwork, that's your problem. Like, you should sort that out. Like, why is that anyone else's issue? And I think if you compare it to, like, I was just in St. Martin in November in the Caribbean, and that's sort of like an island that's split into like the French side and the Dutch side. And it's classed as the EU. And then, like, if you're born there, you get, you know, you're a citizen of St. Martin, but then depending which side of the island you're born, you get a French passport or a Dutch passport. And I'm like, well, that's completely reasonable. You know, you colonize this island, so yeah, you should be able to then give citizenship to people even after independence. And, you know, this country hasn't done that and has actually gone the other way and said even people that have had British passports have been denied, suddenly had their citizenship denied. So it is, you know, there is this feeling that, you know, it's quite precarious if you're a person of colour, because, you know, the onus is on you to prove that you're British all the time. You're not just assumed to be British. And so I think that's part of what the book is about, in, you know, in those terms. I mean, in literal sense, because obviously Laurie is from Jamaica, but, you know, he sort of grew up, you know, this country being the motherland. So he's going home. You know, when the Windrush was sort of sailing up before it docked, the Evening Standard charted a plane, and on the plane it said "Welcome home." So, you know, people thought that, you know, this was like coming back, coming home, coming to the Britain that, you know, we had, you know, they had to learn at school and following the British curriculum and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to make those points in the book that these people didn't see themselves as immigrants. They weren't emigrating to the UK. They were just traveling back to the motherland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved, I mean, what you said about having to constantly prove yourself as British. Like that resonates with me massively, because I mean, I'm British born, was born in London, grew up in London, but my parents are from Pakistan, and so they're immigrants. I mean, they've been here for over 40 years now. But I remember growing up and just there being this sense at home that was just like, well, we could be told to leave at any time. And that now feels like and at the time I remember thinking that that's never going to happen. Like, my parents are just a bit paranoid. But now it feels like a very real possibility, even for someone born here and brought up here. And it's very scary. It's really scary.
It is. I mean, you read some of those stories that sort of came out of the Windrush scandal, and you think, this is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Like, people going on holiday and not being able to come back. Can you imagine?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, your whole life being uprooted because of someone messing up some paperwork. Like, exactly. I mean, it's crazy. And there's no comeback. Like, it's for you to spend money to sort of prove different things, and also you're trapped in a different country. How are you supposed to get, like, it's just, exactly. It seems insane to me, and nobody cares. And still nobody cares. You know, it's in the papers this week, they're sort of cutting off the reparations for the Windrush scandal, and it's like, well, yeah, you already paid about 10 people, so
exactly.
You just wait. They got bored of waiting for people to die, I think. So they're like, "Oh, just cut it off." But it's crazy. There's no empathy.
Exactly. There's no empathy. There's no kind of responsibility for what they did. I mean, what the mistakes that were made here, but also, let's be real, the mistakes that were made during colonization as well. There seems to be no kind of, no responsibility, no kind of acceptance. You know, our lands were destroyed in part, our communities were broken up, families were left devastated as well. And it's just, very sad, really difficult, I find. Yeah, really, really difficult. But let's move on to talk about the character of Lena in Miss Aldridge. I really like Lena. And I was like, even though it's written in the 30s, I feel like she's a very relatable character, because when we meet her at the start of the book, you can kind of tell she's at that phase of life where most of us have been or are currently, where we're like, we thought our life was going to be going in this direction. We thought we'd have our job sorted, a career laid out, great love, romantic life going on, everything settled, but it's not like that. And that is the position that Lena's in. And she literally, and then she witnesses a really traumatic thing. Literally, the girl gets on a boat to travel around the world. I'm like, she's running away from her problems, but as we find, her problems follow her.
Yes.
Which always happens. So, what inspired the character of Lena? Is it how much of your own experiences feed into her character?
In terms of her specific experiences, not very many. I've never witnessed a murder. I've never been on the Queen Mary. But actually, the I guess it's the messy part, I guess, is what you were saying, that I did. It's that mid-20s period that I just had a horrible time because, again, I had no money. I was trying to afford rent in London, you know, but then you're still trying to get out and have a good time with your friends. But, you know, like, it was just, everything was always going wrong. It was just a really turbulent time in my life. So I just wanted to sort of reflect that, but then have that turbulent time already, and then throw some murders in on top. So yeah, she's having like a very bad few weeks, essentially, in this book.
Yeah. And one of the things I liked is that we had this really good, I don't know if that's the right word to use, friendship between Lena and Maggie. And obviously it's also full of secrets and like keeping things from one another and stuff. And I mean, I love that, because I feel like female friendships are one of the best things in my life. And yet we don't see much of it really in literature. What we tend to see is romantic relationships. So how important was it to you to depict this friendship, and what was behind that for you?
I think friendships are really important to me. I'm single, so I mean, I love writing romance, but my friendships are really important to me. So it feels weird to have characters. You know, I can't relate to characters if they don't have like a friends or a friendship circle. So it was important in this lovely city as well. But yeah, I kind of felt like for Lena, I wanted there to be this one sort of ally that she thinks she can trust, to have that, they've got this sort of long-standing, been friends since they were kids, like basically sisters kind of relationship. So yeah, I just felt important that although obviously for a lot of the book she's on the ship and she's a bit isolated, that she at least has this sort of past experience of having this one, because essentially the only two stable relationships she's had in her life are between her and her father, and then her and Maggie, and everything else has always been sort of very up in the air. So I just wanted to kind of have those sort of two things for her to be able to reflect back on when she's sort of in this isolated position.
Yeah, and actually you write really nicely about her relationship with her father, who he passes away. I always get unsure how much to delve, but I don't think it's a huge spoiler. It's okay.
I mean, that's fine, because it's in the beginning, like he's died before that. He's not been murdered, he's died before the book starts. It's just kind of like, it was sort of a different layer to her. I don't know, it kind of came out of nowhere. It just kind of came into my head. I just felt like there was something sad about her as well, as all the messed up layers. So I was like, oh, so she's just had this sort of grief thing that she's been dealing with as well. So that was where that sort of came from. And then he just sort of kept coming back into it, I guess because he is important. And he's going to be in the sequel a bit as well, sort of in terms of a earlier sort of flashback kind of situation.
Because I love that he kind of came back a few times in the flashbacks, and it helped give more depth to Lena. It helped give us obviously like more of a picture, but it developed him as a character without him being physically present in the plot and in the book, which I really liked. And actually it was nice to read a book about a positive father and daughter relationship and also like in, with the Black community and as someone of color as well. Often kind of the perceptions or the representation of men is that they're not emotional, they're not good fathers, they're absent fathers, or, they're like harsh, they don't relate to their children, they're not emotional. But actually, like in Miss Aldridge, we saw that actually it was quite a meaningful relationship between father and daughter.
Yeah, it was. I just kind of kept feeling it was important to her as well, because with Lena, obviously she's mixed race, but she can pass as white, and her father was Black. So it was important for her to have that touchdown with her heritage as well, so that it actually means something. So when she's on the ship and she's passing, it actually starts to take a toll on her, because she feels guilty to his memory that she's almost writing off this part of herself, and she never knew her mother when she was growing up. So he was the only parent, and so it's just always they were like this partnership. So so it really starts to affect her that she has to sort of lie about who she is, because it is like she's denying her own father. So I felt that's also why he kept coming into it, because I thought it was just important in terms of exploring that aspect of her race, because I feel like part of the reason I made her sort of light skinned was that when I was starting to write the book was when the whole Meghan Markle thing was first blowing up. So like around about sort of 2018, 2019. And a white friend said to me, but she looks white. So how, is it really racist? Does she suffer from racism? And I was like, well, yeah. I don't have time to
Well,
delve into that right now.
yeah.
But have you got an hour or two? But I kind of feel like actually maybe people don't get this. So maybe it would be cool to explore that and actually have a character who, you know, is sort of going through this thing herself and trying to understand about her race and how people see her and how that can just change just because somebody, you know, someone might treat you one way one day and then they find out that you've got this black parrot and then they treat you differently. And that's the thing that happens. And so I kind of just wanted to see that through this character's eyes, I guess.
Yeah, and actually I want to explore this concept that you write about, which is passing, which is essentially that she pretends to be a white woman, and it's like a transition, right? She literally passes over, or you literally pass over into this community and as a new identity, and we see it throughout the book, or like early on as well, where she's talking, you know, she's been told to say that she's European, she's Italian, and she's constantly doubting herself, and then there's like one person she meets that can kind of see that she's not what she says that she is, and there's a bit where she's like really, really panicked by it. And I think one of the other books I read, which is all about passing, is Brit Bennett's The Vanishing Half. And what astonished me about that book was that it wasn't just that she passed, it was that she lived her whole life, her whole like adult life, deceiving everybody, like her husband and had children and all of that. But what was it like for you writing that transition and writing about essentially about passing? What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was. So I mean, I read Brit Bennett's book. A book which I'm sure she's read as well would have been Nella Larsen's Passing, which is from like one of the big Harlem Renaissance novels, which I was always slightly obsessed by because I was just again, because she has the concept where you have these two women, both of them can pass, and one of them chooses to live in the black community, and one of them's literally completely turned her back, and again has married this white man who's completely racist. So there's like there's a literal danger attached to him ever finding out that she's black. And so I've always kind of wanted to write about this, and then it just felt like a natural place to sort of, a natural story where it would sort of fit, because it is important for Lena in terms of she's traveling first class, she's traveling with rich Americans who would definitely have an issue with her sitting at that table if they knew the truth. And so I kind of felt like it was just like the right environment to sort of explore it, but then also remember that she's just like a normal person trying to live her life. But I think for me, it was just more like her mental state. I mean, there's a lot going on apart from that that she's got to deal with. But yeah, I think also the character Will, who's the one person that sort of sees her immediately, he came in because I did want her to have a bit of an ally on the ship and to have someone that she didn't have to have this sort of disguise up for, because I felt like it is a disguise. I mean, it does, you know, in The Vanishing Half and in Passing, you know, those women aren't happy.
Of course
not. Who have turned their back on their community, they're miserable, and they're trying to, in a way, try and get back, but then they've sort of gone too far. You know, it's too hard to suddenly years later go, oh, by the way, I'm sort of black.
And to constantly live with carrying that burden and that fear that you're going to slip up, and then everything is gonna be wasted, essentially. Exactly.
Yeah, you've got. I mean, you know, there are stakes. You know, if you mess up, if someone finds you out, you've lied, or you'll have been, even if you haven't technically lied, you know, people will see you as having misrepresented yourself, and they won't trust you. You'll lose the opportunities that you've gained. Because I guess the reason that people pass is because they think they're going to gain something from passing as white. But then if you find out, you lose that and more. So, you know, you end up worse off than when you started. So there's all these different things that are at stake for all of these women in all of these books. But yeah, I kind of felt like it was kind of just really interested me for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in it as well as like a phenomenon. Like I had read a little bit about it, just like randomly online and stuff before, but when I read The Vanishing Half, I was really just like, oh my goodness, like I can't imagine what that decision to decide that this is what you're going to do is so big, because kind of like once you take a step forward, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to come back. And in The Vanishing Half, what we see is that she tests it out, right, in the shops before they run away. She tests it out to see how far she can get, and who believes her. But then, and then she actually does it, and she disappears. And and so I think that's why, like you said before as well, with Lena in Miss Aldridge, like it was really the relationship with her father. And I guess in many ways, perhaps when he was alive, it anchored her a little bit more to her roots. And now that he's gone, she didn't have that anymore. But like you said, it made her feel guilty because she was losing a part of her own heritage and her identity. And by extension, she was losing him again. She'd already lost him once when he'd passed away. And then now she was going through the process of losing him again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. But yeah, so what did you kind of like, did you read much about passing? Was there anything interesting or shocking that you found out?
The main thing I did was I reread Nella Larson's passing, because I guess it's set in the 1920s, so it's not a wildly different time to when my book's set. And I think it's definitely a theme that I'm running into in the next book as well, because the next book's going to be set in New York when sort of Lena arrives in Harlem, so it's going to touch on a little bit more. It's anything more like giving anything away. But yeah, I mean, I didn't want to copy either of those books, either that or The Vanishing Half, in any way. And also, like, I feel like there's a lot, especially in passing, there's a lot of tragedy, it's a death, and I mean, obviously there's death in mine because it's a murder mystery, but I didn't want it to be because of that particularly. It's because there's a crazy killer on board. So yeah, I kind of just let Lena's story be her own story. Yeah, I'm not really a plotter either, so I just sort of let things go the way they are. But yeah, I just really like playing with that. I guess that guilt and the fact that she definitely feels like she's betraying Alfie, her father, by doing this. But then at the same time, she's sort of she's been sort of driven into a corner with stuff that's happened, and she needs the money to use this job in New York, which is why she's going there. So yeah, it's just having a terrible couple of weeks, basically.
Yeah, she had it rough. And actually, and obviously, like in the Vanishing Half, for example, Stella's passing or like transition, whatever, is central to the book. And again, in Miss Aldridge, although it is actually really important in the book, and I think it kind of almost like haunts it throughout, still what remains central is this murder mystery. Who is killing all these people? Yeah. What's going on? Who is the bad guy or woman? I love that. I mean, I think it was good. It stayed true to what you wanted with your central plot. But you cover a lot of things, as we have established in this conversation. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of things. We have the murder mystery, we have the passing and race and class and family and friendship and love and betrayal and deceit and all the wonderful things. How did you how did you kind of balance that in your mind and in your writing? Did you ever feel like there's too much going on, I need to rein it in, she's carried a bit too much? How was that for you?
Yeah, I don't know how it happened. I guess because I don't really plot. Like, I literally have, okay, this should happen by this point, and this should happen by this point, and that's my plot. And then everything else, I just sort of follow the character. I'm quite character led in the way that I write. Yeah, and there are quite a lot of different themes, but I mean, necessarily start out with all those themes in my head as things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the passing. I wanted the murder mystery. That's what I started out with. As soon as we went on the boat, because the boat's divided into classes, so then you have to talk about class because that's just how the whole thing's set up. And so, yeah, and then lots of the other themes sort of came in.
It is a real boat, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's the Queen Mary, which I was eventually going to make my own boat, and then I realised that because it was such an iconic ship at the time, there's just loads of books about it, and you can get like all the deck plans, you can get photos of every single room. Wow. So I was just like, oh, this is going to be so much easier if I just use this ship. Which, I mean, you can still, I think it's closed at the moment still for COVID, but it's a hotel in Los Angeles now. So it's still in one piece, although it doesn't look exactly the same as it did in 1936. But yeah, so yeah, there's lots of things. I guess because I don't plot, I sit down and I'm like, okay, I just think, okay, well, this chapter, I need to have a conversation between Lena and this person. And then I pick a room for it to happen in. And then I think, okay, what do these two people have to talk about? And then stuff happens, stuff comes in. So it just kind of happens organically that these are themes that I'm interested in, and just they sort of creep in. Yeah, the first draft's always a bit messy. And then I sort of go back and think about, okay, well, what doesn't need to be there? And try and work it out that way.
No, I mean, I think the fact that there was so much in there helped build suspense and keep it kind of moving, and like I felt like there was a lot of energy throughout the whole book, which is good. I mean, I love the fact that there was so much in there. So when it comes to your writing, what do you really hope to achieve? Like, what is the one thing you want to achieve?
I guess the one thing would be just that I hope people enjoy it, and that it's a fun, especially with Miss Aldridge, like I just want it to be a fun read. And then if people get other stuff out of it from the other themes, then even better. But I know that a lot of people will just read it as like a straightforward murder mystery, won't pick up on like lots of the things, and that's fine, as long as if they just enjoy the main part of the mystery, then that's still good.
And what authors and writers inspire you?
So I think when I was starting out, probably Sarah Waters, in terms of historical fiction.
Okay, yeah.
Because she was sort of putting the LGBT community back into historical London, especially, and that was kind of some similar lines of what I was trying to do in terms of people of color. And she's an incredible writer. So I think definitely she was someone who I aspired to sort of be like. I love James Baldwin.
Oh, yes.
And I love, particularly when I was writing This Lovely City, I read Another Country, which is about, got a lot of sort of jazz music in as well. So I wanted to sort of understand how to write about music in fiction without it being overpowering. So that was a really great book. And I mean, I just love his writing anyway. And probably Colson Whitehead as well. Okay. I would say I really enjoy the Nickel Boys, because I like how he balances humor with tragedy. Like, he has horrific things happen to some of his characters, but then there's always this, especially with the Nickel Boys, because they're in this sort of reform school, and just horrible things happen to these lads, but they're also like great friends, and they have fun together amidst all the sort of beatings that happen. So, I always aspire to be able to do that kind of balance of humor and, real tragedy. Yeah.
So you have alluded a little bit to the book that you're currently working on, but can you can you share a little bit more about your future writing plans and what we can expect from you?
Yeah, well, I need to talk to my editors about what I have to write after this one. But the next one is, I'm just proofreading it now, so it's done pretty much. So that'll be out in September.
Okay.
And so this is what happens to Lena when she gets to New York, essentially. I can't really say too much more because, you don't know who's survived to get to New York with her. But
although it's a sequel, do you think it can also be read as a standalone?
Yeah, so I've basically written it so that it can be read on its own without you having to know what happened.
Okay.
So there's a little few details that I've included, so you know she's been on a ship and da. But yeah, the actual story is a sort of adventure for her, I guess.
That's
so she's sort of exploring New York and obviously there's a death, so I have to keep it sort of a murder mystery. So yeah, so Lena having more terrible times, but in a new glamorous setting. And then so there might be more Lena books after that. I'm not sure, but then there's also a book set in the 1760s that I actually wrote a first draft of back in 2020. It seems like a long time ago now. During all the lockdowns, and I want to go back to that at some point as well. So
1760s, quite a long time ago.
It is. So I'll need to do some more because I've forgotten all the research that I did.
Yeah.
But I quite enjoyed it because of all the lockdowns. But you could go to the British Library, you could make an appointment. So it felt like a day out because you couldn't really go anywhere. But as long as you had an appointment to the British Library, you could go and sit there and wear your face mask and do your research. So that was like my little adventure that I would do once a week. So yeah, I would like to go back to that book potentially this year.
That sounds really exciting. And I want to ask, what has been your favourite part? The whole writing, research, being published, like what's been the best thing out of it all?
Oh, it's so difficult. I mean, there's just been lots of unexpected opportunities, I guess. Like something that happened last year was that I suddenly started getting asked to interview authors, which I'd never sort of thought about.
Like on panels and stuff?
Yeah. So I got asked to go to the Hay Festival, which is really, up there as a literary festival. Not to talk about my books, but to interview 2 other authors. So I spoke to Julia Owen Moylan, who was a debut author, and I interviewed Tori Peters. Her novel, The Transition Baby, that was launched with the Women's Prize. So that was like, oh, okay, like I'm a person that can interview people now. Okay, cool. So that's been really nice. Just it always feels nice when people, I guess, I don't know, you feel like you made it a bit when people hold you in that sort of regard that you're allowed access to people who I think are like way better than I am.
And what's it been like seeing readers read your book and come back with reviews and feedback? What's that been like?
Yeah, it's been really lovely. I mean, so far, I don't tend to read reviews, but in terms of like going out and doing events and talking to people, it's been just so nice and interesting to talk to people and see what different things people get out of the books as well, and what sticks with people, because it's always like something different that, sometimes it's stuff I've forgotten that's even in, especially This Lovely City, because I wrote it like years ago now. And I haven't reread it since beginning of 2020. So people are like, oh, this bit, but it's like, oh, okay, yeah, like I don't remember writing that at all. I don't tell them that. I'm like, oh yeah. But you can't keep it all in your head, and also because you write so many different drafts. Like on average, I write 8 to 10 drafts for each book.
Oh wow!
And so there's stuff that you take out, and then the stuff that you put in at the last minute, and you forget. So sometimes I remember stuff that I took out, but it's not in there anymore. And especially the stuff that you write last minute, like that just goes, I've only written it once, so it just goes out of my head.
Exactly.
I've not had to reread it 1,000 times, which with the rest of the book you will have. So there's just different bits that you sort of are more memorable to me than others, just because of how the editing process goes.
Wow. Interesting. Well, Louise, thank you so much. It's been so much fun talking to you, and I have loved your books and cannot wait for Miss Aldridge 2 in September. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much to Louise for such a fun and insightful conversation. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the podcast.